The Rosenbergs. In 1953, the United States was paralyzed by the fear of a nuclear apocalypse. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg weren't just common criminals. They were true believers in the Soviet cause who handed over the blueprints for the world's end. Their betrayal led them to the death house at Sing Sing prison. On June 19th, they were allowed one last meeting, speaking through a thick glass partition. Julius went to the chair first at 8 p.m. and died instantly. But for Ethel, the execution was a descent into horror. The first 3 massive jolts of electricity failed to stop her heart. 2 more were forced through her body as witnesses watched in shock. By the time she was pronounced dead at 8:11 p.m., smoke was reportedly rising from her head. They remained the only American civilians ever executed for espionage during the Cold War. Guy Fawkes didn't just want to kill a king, he wanted to erase the entire British government in a single explosion. He was discovered in a cold, dark cellar beneath the House of Lords, guarding 36 barrels of gunpowder, enough to level the building. When he was arrested, he had matches in his pockets and 0 regrets, only stating he was sorry the plan had failed. For weeks, he was suspended by manacles and stretched on the rack until his body was broken. His sentence was to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, which involved being disemboweled while still conscious. However, Fawkes had one last act of defiance. As he climbed the ladder to the gallows, he threw himself off with such force that he broke his own neck, dying instantly and cheating the executioner's knife. Robert Ford became a legend for all the wrong reasons, the dirty little coward who betrayed his own friend for a bounty. On a hot April day in 1882, Ford and his brother were at the home of the famous outlaw Jesse James, pretending to plan a robbery. When Jesse turned his back to straighten a crooked picture on the wall, Ford drew his weapon and shot him in the back of the head. Ford expected to be a hero, but the public despised him for his treachery. He spent years drifting through the West, trying to outrun his reputation. It finally ended in a tent saloon in Colorado. A man named Edward O'Kelly walked in with a shotgun, greeted him with a simple, "Hello, Bob," and blasted both barrels into Ford's chest, leaving a hole that ended his life at just 30 years old. Judas Iscariot. No name in the history of mankind carries more weight than Judas Iscariot. He was one of the inner circle, an apostle who sold out his teacher for 30 pieces of silver, roughly the price of a slave at the time. He identified his target with a kiss, a gesture of love used for the ultimate betrayal. But the blood money felt like fire in his hands. When he tried to return the coins, the priests laughed at him. While some accounts say he simply hanged himself in despair, the Book of Acts offers a much more graphic finale. It describes Judas falling headlong in a field, where his body literally burst open and his bowels spilled across the ground. The field was forever known as Atseldama, the field of blood. Mata Hari was the ultimate femme fatale, an exotic dancer who used her beauty to navigate the high society circles of World War I Europe. Born in the Netherlands, she traveled freely across borders, eventually becoming a double agent for both the French and the Germans. The French eventually grew suspicious and intercepted coded messages identifying a spy named H-21. They believed her actions had led to the deaths of 50,000 soldiers. In October 1917, she was led before a firing squad of 12 soldiers. True to her persona, she refused a blindfold and blew a kiss to the men holding the rifles. After the volley of bullets hit her, an officer stepped forward and fired a final shot into her head. Her body was never claimed. It was sent to a medical school for dissection. Vidkun Quisling. During the dark days of World War II, Vidkun Quisling became the man who sold Norway's soul to Hitler. He used a national radio broadcast to declare himself the leader of the country, while the real king was still in hiding. He spent years acting as a puppet for the Nazis, believing he was a visionary. When the war ended, he was captured and put on trial, where he insisted he was an innocent patriot. The Norwegian people didn't see it that way. He was woken up at 2 a.m. and taken to a clearing in a fortress. As the firing squad took aim, he shouted that he was being treated unfairly. His death was instant, but his legacy was permanent. His name is now a global dictionary term for a traitor who sells out his own country. Marcus Junius Brutus was Caesar's close friend, and someone Caesar had personally pardoned after a civil war. But Brutus was convinced that Caesar was becoming a tyrant. During a Senate meeting, he and a group of conspirators surrounded the dictator and stabbed him 23 times. Brutus expected the people of Rome to cheer for their freedom, but he was wrong. Instead, the public turned into a violent mob, forcing Brutus to flee to Greece. After his forces were finally crushed by Mark Antony at the Battle of Philippi, Brutus realized his cause was lost. To avoid being paraded through Rome in chains as a common criminal, he commanded a friend to hold his sword while he threw himself onto the blade, impaling himself in a final, bloody act of escape. Akechi Mitsuhide. In 16th century Japan, Akechi Mitsuhide was a trusted general for Oda Nobunaga, the man on the verge of unifying the nation. While Nobunaga was resting at a temple in Kyoto with only a small guard, Mitsuhide saw his chance for power. He surrounded the temple with thousands of troops and set the building on fire. Nobunaga, trapped in the flames, was forced to commit ritual suicide. Mitsuhide claimed power, but his reign lasted only 13 days, long enough to be remembered as the 13-day shogun. He was defeated in battle, and, while trying to flee, he was ambushed by peasants in a bamboo forest. He was stabbed with bamboo spears and sliced to pieces by bandits, a dishonorable end for a samurai who broke his oath. Robert Hansen. Robert Hansen was a high-ranking FBI agent who spent over 20 years living a double life. He sold thousands of highly classified documents to the Soviets and Russians, including nuclear war strategies and the names of American informants. His betrayal was so deep that it led to the execution of multiple U.S. sources overseas. He was finally caught in 2001 while leaving a package at a dead drop in a Virginia park. To escape the death penalty, he pleaded guilty and was sent to a supermax prison in Colorado, where he was locked in a concrete cell for 23 hours a day. He spent over 2 decades in total isolation before dying of colon cancer in June 2023, forgotten by the world he had tried to burn. Benedict Arnold. In American history, there is no name more hated than Benedict Arnold. He was George Washington's most brilliant general, a hero who had bled for the Revolution. But Arnold felt unappreciated and passed over for promotion, so he decided to sell the American fort at West Point to the British for money and a high-ranking commission. The plot was discovered at the last minute, and Arnold narrowly escaped to the British side, where he spent the rest of the war fighting against his former friends. He eventually moved to London, but he found that no one respects a traitor. He spent his final years broke, sick with gout, and in constant pain. On his deathbed in 1801, he reportedly asked to wear his old Continental uniform one last time, dying in a foreign land with nothing but debt and a legacy of shame.